Variable ND filters. Every filmmaker is going to use one at some point in their career. And not only because they're super fast and efficient, but also because they're extremely easy to use. You can just turn the front ring and it gives you a different exposure. You don't need to know too much about stops or any of the difficult methodology. The downside, however, is that you need to screw them onto your lens and take them back off if you want to get rid of the ND. And I don't know how they do it, but these filter threads never stick the first time you try it. You always have to fiddle, and that is super annoying. So when Freewell reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to try their magnetic filter system, I said yes, because this kind of sounds too good to be true. I do own a couple of my own VNDs, so that's good because now we can try and test them out against one another for color accuracy, vignetting, and color shift. So the VNDs that I own are the PolarPro Peter McKinnon version. I also have the Simod lens, which is a rather unknown brand, but it's really good. And of course my internal NDs on my camera. Make sure you keep on watching if you're interested in a very detailed, a little bit nerdy test on these VNDs, because I'm going to test everything out on these ones so you know exactly which one you need to get. But first, a quick word on VNDs in general. The word VND stands for Variable Neutral Density Filter. An ND filter is, in easy terms, sunglasses for the sensor of your lens. It reduces the amount of light onto the sensor so we can shoot with a wider aperture, creating a very nice image with a lot of depth of field, even in broad daylight situations. Then of course there's a couple different ND filter variations. The first one is just plain pieces of darkened glass. These ones are usually the highest quality because they don't have any shift in color. Doesn't matter if you add 2 stops, 4 stops, 6 stops, 10 stops, they usually just remain the same. They also come in screw-on variations, but yeah, you have to screw on even, more often because you don't really have the flexibility of a variable ND. Then of course you also have internal ND filters. These ones are very useful because I can just press a button and a new piece of darkened glass slides in front of my sensor. Then you've got VNDs. These basically are 2 polarizing glasses rotating in front of one another, creating the desired effect. Usually, the cheaper you go, the more trade-offs you get. For example, when putting this at the maximum amount of ND, you get a lot of vignetting and cross patterns in your image. Also, the cheaper they are, the more color shift they have. Usually, when buying a more expensive VND, the brand uses better quality glass, reducing these trade-offs. But one thing is true, and that is doesn't matter what kind of VND brand you use, they always have some sort of color shift. Doesn't matter what brand it is. Now, let's take a look at the Freewell magnetic VND filter system, because it is quite intuitive and nice. So the smart people over at Freewell did something genius in my opinion. They took apart the regular traditional VND, which is 2 pieces of glass, and they sort of divided it over into separate pieces that you can magnetically click onto the lens. So this way you've got your base, you've got a 2 to 5 stop, a 6 to 9 stop, a mist base, so you can use the entire range with a 1/8 mist filter. Then you've also got a magnetic lens cap and a ring that of course attaches to the lens. I hear you think, that's a lot. So let me break this whole thing down. So the core of this entire system is the ring, which you luckily have to put on your lens once. So, nice. Okay, so that's done. Then there are a couple markings on the inside of the ring that corresponds to markings on the base rings. Now, this is, for example, the regular VND base, which functions as a 1-stop ND filter. So I can pop that in like so. And then if I want to add more ND, I can just grab my 2 to 5 stop, find the right markings, which you can find right here. It's the A and the Freewell logo. Then find the A and the Freewell logo on the ring right here. Click it, and now you've got a regular variable ND filter from 2 to 5 stops of ND. Now, you can swap this one out with the 6 to 9 stops, like so. Now you've got a regular 6 to 9 stop ND. But the great thing about this whole system is that you can just swap this one around, and now you've got a 32 stop circular polarizer, which is great to use for photography. For example, when you want to do longer exposures of waterfalls or water and reduce the amount of glare. Now, you can also use the 2 to 5 stops, flip it around, and now you have a circular polarizer as you would normally use it. So you can reduce glare on like shiny objects, water, cars, glass, doesn't matter. Now, as if this is not enough, we also have, of course, the mist base. You can pop this one in and then you get a 1/8 mist filter, and you can still use the entire range of VND filters. Crazy. And of course, you get the glass, sort of, I don't know, aluminum glass, magnetic front ring that only works when you take off the rest of the filters to keep them safe. This is, however, a fingerprint magnet. Not really nice. As you can see, the functionality is endless. And the great thing is that it comes with a very neat and beautiful sleeve that is, of course, magnetic. The great thing is that it has sliding trays. The only downside is that when you have fingers like mine, it is quite hard to get these filters out once they're, all in there, because it is quite tight. So I found it pretty hard to get it out, but if you have smaller fingers, then it might not be an issue for you. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for, the extremely nerdy but fun VND test. Sit back, relax, because it's going to be a lot. And if you have any questions, make sure to let me know in the comments below, because I can understand that this is going a bit far. Let's get to it. Okay, so I'm briefly going to explain you what we did here. So I created a scene here in the studio with a color checker so we can check the color accuracy of all the filters in a controlled environment. And then also I shot against the blue sky to really see what the vignetting does and how the color shift throughout the range is. All right, so let's move over to the color page. The good thing about all these clips is that I only converted them using the same LUT. So I converted them using the Blackmagic LUT from log to Rec 709. So there's nothing tampered with the colors, like everything is original. And then I only leveled it with the raw controls to get an even exposure. However, I want to mention that whenever we check the color checker here and I move this offset slider, so I push in more luminance or pull out more luminance, you can see that these colored dots remain the same. All right. This is important because when we check different VND values and the exposure isn't 100% correct, the colors will remain accurate. Does that make sense? All right. So now we know that, we can now start to see the difference in color shift when we scroll through different VND values. All right, so the first clip here is the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K. The Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro without any filters whatsoever, shot on the Sigma 18-35. All right, chose this lens for a reason because it's super sharp and very natural looking. All right, so as you can see, it's, the colors are right in the ballpark of where they should be. When we put on the 2 stops of VND, you can see that we have a slight shift towards the blue end. All right, so this is nothing, 2 stop, nothing, 2 stop, right? 2 stop, 4 stop, 2 stop, 4 stop. You can see that the little balls get a little bit bigger. That's because of the grain, all right? Because of course I'm adding in VND filter, so I'm also adding in more light, but eventually I had to crank up my ISO a little bit. So 2 stop, 4 stop, 6 stop. 2 stop, 4 stop, 6 stop. You can see that there is a shift, right? So I can honestly say that the VND filters inside the Pocket 6K Pro are not the greatest, but they are super convenient and they're also not terrible. So I love using them. But yes, there is a slight color shift, but it's not dramatic. All right. Now let's move over to the second one, which is the Simod 1.6-6 VND. All right. So this is nothing, no VND. And then this is 1.6. Yes, there is a super heavy shift towards the red end, the red-yellow end. That is something to notice. But then whenever I add in more VND, so from 1 to 6 to like 3, nothing changes. A little bit on the green one right here, a little bit green, but nothing terrible. All right, so you can see that the colors do remain quite the same on the Simod one, which is nice. Then we move over to the PolarPro. Okay, so no VND, VND2, VND4, VND5. You can see that it goes all over the place. So it starts well, right here. Then we go over to the green side, then we go over to the cyan side, and then we go over to the blue side. So it really makes a little curve, and you can really clearly see that when we do the blue sky test. So next up is the Freewell 1 to 5, so the base and then the added filter. So this is no ND, 1 ND, again, a strong shift towards the warmer tones, and then 3 ND, 5 ND. Almost no shift. So whenever you add the filter, there is almost no shift, which is important. All right, so you can see a little bit of movement, but it's not too much. All right. Then we go over to the 6 to 9 ND, and this is where it gets interesting. Look at it. So this is nothing. This is 6, only a little bit of noise. This is 7, and this is 9. You can see that all the dots remain in the same place. Crazy. Usually the higher you go into an ND value, the more color shift you have, especially on a variable ND filter. So I'm really impressed with the 6 to 9. Nice. Okay, so let's move over to the blue sky test. For this, we move over to the waveform. Reason for this is because you can clearly see what the colors do, all right? And you can also see the vignetting because the outsides of the waveform will start to bend, all right? So this is the Freewell 1, 3, 5 stops. So this is Blackmagic no filter, and then 1 stop, 3 stop, 5 stop. All right, let's do that again. No, 1, 3, 5. Okay, so there is a little bit of shift. Of course, now the luminance values and the exposure does play a little bit more of a role, but you can see that overall, whenever you put the filter on, it kind of remains the same. All right, so only when you put in ND5, there's a little bit more of a rich blue color compared to the first 1 and 3. But I think it is quite good. For such a versatile filter system, it's quite good. All right, next up, the 6 to 9. So this is no filter, 6, 7, 9. All right, so the interesting thing you can see here is that we do have a little bit of a tint shift, which is funny because right here you didn't really see it too badly, but here you can definitely see a little bit of a tint shift, which is fine. Also, it's not the end of the world, but what you do see is quite some heavy vignetting. All right, so you can see the outsides drop a little bit. That means that there is less light. There's less light on the outside frames, okay? So here is everything nice and straight because the entire image is nice and exposed, and then boom, the outsides fall off. All right. You can also see it really clearly. Whenever I move to it, you almost see a circle in the middle of the frame. You see that? Anyway, next up is the PolarPro. All right, so no ND, 2 stops, 4 stops, 5 stops. So you can really see a very heavy green cast over the image. And I'm still not 100% sure if they did this on purpose or not, because this filter is used by a lot of travel filmmakers, and honestly, this is the look that a lot of these videos are kind of shot in and pushed towards. So maybe they did it on purpose. I don't know. Maybe Peter is a smart guy. Well, I know he's a smart guy. Anyway, there is quite some shift, but I must say that the vignetting stays out. Okay, so you see a little bit of drop off on the ND5, but it's not too bad. Okay, now we have the Simod. All right, so no ND, ND1 or 1.6, ND3-ish, and then boom, ND6. Okay, so the interesting part from this filter, which I unfortunately don't have here right now because a friend is borrowing it, it has an extra polarizing circle filter built in. So I can move the polarizer so I can sort of align it with the, how to say that, like the horizon, so you don't see too much vignetting. So I can actually play around with the polarizer, and that way I have a lot more flexibility because none other filter on the market I have seen so far has that option. So yes, there is a lot of vignetting now, but I can easily turn it a little bit and then it's gone. And personally, I hardly shoot on ND6. So yeah, but if you do, you have the option to play around with the vignetting. That's pretty cool. All right, next up and lastly, we've got the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro internal ND filters. So this is no ND. This is ND4, ND2, ND4, ND6. Okay, so the interesting bit here is that you can clearly see that it is not a variable ND filter. The reason for this is because, you know, the entire image sort of uniformly scales up and down. Okay, so you can just clearly see that the glass is a little bit of a higher quality, I would say. All right, so the only thing is on ND6, you do have a little bit of vignetting, but overall, I think, you know, image quality wise, it is very good. There is a little shift in tone, but nothing you cannot change in the grade, I noticed. So I personally think that the internal NDs are, you know, good enough to use. So what did we learn from this? Well, I personally think that the Freewell system, even though it is a lot more flexible than the rest of these VNDs, is actually super good. The color accuracy, the shift, everything is good enough, I would say. Yes, there is a little bit of shift, but that's what I already mentioned. That's just the drawback of using a VND. As you can see with the internal ND filters, there's a lot less of a change in image quality or, you know, change in image overall. So if you want the best and the highest quality, you should just use like the 4x5.6 matte box filters, but they're super expensive. So I think it's a really good filter. Let's continue. Let's talk about some pros and cons of this filter system. First, the cons. I found it pretty difficult to find the right mounting points. So when you want to stack this 2:5 onto your lens, it's quite difficult to find where to mount it exactly. There are, of course, little engravings, but they're so small. And if you're out in bright sunlight or in a hurry, it is quite frustrating to find them. However, another thing is that I don't really get the reason why they shifted the 6 to 9 stop and 2 to 5 stop markings, because this one is exactly underneath the place you need to mark it and this one is not. So I don't really get it, but maybe they have a reason for that. The other one is that the 32 CPL filter has a pretty strong tint shift, and this is, in my opinion, for video, not really usable. For photo, it doesn't really matter because you have a lot more detail, but in video, I wouldn't really use this. But I don't think you use an ND32 CPL for video anyway. So maybe they did it with purpose. I don't know. Anyway, let's move on to the pros. The pros of this system is that it is extremely easy to use. You can basically just flop them together and you have an ND filter. You can just swap them out really fast. So it's definitely a time saver if you're running on Filmmaker. Also, the case it comes in is just so nice. I just don't have any words for it. It's just, you know, nice. Love it. Now let's talk about the conclusion. I think this system is great for filmmakers that do a lot of travel, that do a lot of weddings, that basically shoot with one lens the entire day. The reason for this is because if you use multiple lenses, you need to screw this thing off. You can of course buy multiple of these base rings, but I don't think that is really worth the money. So would I recommend this? I would definitely highly recommend this. If you are one of those creators that do work with one particular zoom lens, for example, the Sigma 18-35, great, this one is definitely a keeper. But if you are one like me and that uses a lot of prime lenses, I wouldn't really recommend this too badly. Also, this one comes in at a price of 399 euros, which is a lot of money. And especially because there's a lot of great brands that create cheaper alternatives that are actually quite good. For example, the K&F Concept lens filters. Yeah, it's kind of difficult to make the choice, but if you have the money and you want a proper system that is easy to use and it fits your needs, then this one is actually really good. So guys, I hope this video was helpful. It was a lot of work to do all these tests. So if you're interested in one of these things, you can check the links in the description below. They are affiliated, so you are helping me out a little bit financially, which is extremely appreciated. So with that being said, thank you so much for watching, my friends, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. And for now, have a great day, evening, morning, wherever you are in the world. That's it.